like to ask the question again, because I think the reason the noises are so loud out there and the reason everyone got quiet when we saw someone moving is that people think the stakes of this question are high.
They are.
And that parents worry if they listen to you, Mr. Palumbo, and wait and act later, they may not be taking care of their child or loving their child as they are. And it sounds like you're all right with them doing that later, but not earlier. And I think that's a big burden of proof for that question.
I understand completely, and that's why I think this is a really complicated issue.
What I learned from reading the emergency rule in the state of Missouri restricting transgender surgery is there is research to say that if kids go through the puberty of their biological sex, they are going to be more likely to embrace their biological sex and desist from believing that they're trans. That to me is a pretty good reason to go through the biological puberty of your sex. And I say that understanding that there will be trans people who go through the quote unquote wrong puberty that medically transition later, but there are an awful lot of trans people in the world who transition as adults after they've already gone through their biological puberty. And though it might be inconvenient, and I understand that, I think that the inconvenience of everyone going through that biological puberty to make sure that they just aren't gay or just effeminate or whatever is actually like the greater good for the greatest number of individuals, because a lot of people who think they're trans when they're younger or whose parents convince them that they're trans because they have Munchausen's by proxy, those ideas are going to go away once the child goes through their biological puberty, and then they're going to discover, oh, I'm gay. Okay, well, nothing wrong with that. Live your best life. But for people who do still persist in saying, like, no, I'm not the biological sex, well, guess what? You can still medically transition. And don't we want people to be sure? Don't we want people to, before they start cutting off body parts and making themselves sterile, don't we want them to be absolutely sure? People transition as adults all the time, and they go on to live perfectly happy lives transitioning as adults.
I don't envy a parent who has a child with severe gender dysphoria. I can see why they would be incredibly torn on what the right thing to do is. But what I will say is that it's actually the process of going through puberty as your natal sex that often causes gender incongruity to desist. So the problem is that now
exactly, Brad, you got there.
Cross-sex hormones, they never actually go. That's why previously, decades ago, when you had gender incongruent youth, many of them grew up to be gay men or lesbian women. And that was because when they went through their puberty, they reconciled their gender. They realized the things they were feeling didn't mean they were actually
Is there a point after
body.
A certain trial of puberty where you'd feel comfortable with a minor transitioning when they say, I've given it a good shot, Mr. Palumbo? Like you said, this works for some people. It doesn't work for me.
That's why it's so hard to have the government come in and set a one-size-fits-all rule. I have also said that, I think the age of consent should be 18, but in some states it's 16 or 17. It would make sense to me then that in those states, you could also transition gender at 16 or 17. But I don't know exactly where to draw the line. And that's part of my point here, is that Michael keeps saying transgenderism is false. And if it is false, it should be banned. I don't believe the government should be in the business of banning false ideas. Michael's also said that transgenderism is a false religion. So then we want to ban religions. I'm wondering what happened to freedom of religion? What happened to freedom of speech? And also, the average federal bureaucrat has the politics of Elizabeth Warren. And I know you can cite noble things about self-government, but the truth is we have a bloated bureaucracy that does not represent the American people. It is an entrenched political class with politics much different than yours. So the idea that we're going to make that government the arbiter of what ideas are true and false and ban or eradicate some ideas as a result of that seems to me not just a bad idea on principle, but incredibly short-sighted for people from your background and worldview and values.